Well, good afternoon, everybody. And good afternoon to the folks. We've got some folks joining us on Zoom. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your flexibility with the schedule. Although we get to be in the cool air of one of the newly upgraded ACs, I promise I didn't plan it that way. But thank you all for being here. If we'll see, Jake, if you want to move to the next slide, we'll see a little bit of the agenda today. It's pretty straightforward. I do want to say a special thanks to everybody who helped to make this possible, as well as the folks that helped volunteer and set up. Just really appreciate that. If you didn't get a chance to sign in person, please do so on your way out. It's just helpful for us to know who's here. And for those on Zoom, if you haven't already, please put your name in the chat status. And Paul is doing a great job with all of that. So, you see kind of the layout of how we're doing this today. Feel free, I've got a mic. It's a lot more intimate in here, so you can use this. Probably helpful for the Zoom folks to hear you, but there'll be plenty of times for question and answer, and then the goal is for you to have all the questions answered before we vote, and then we'll be able to do that. So with that, let us open in prayer, and then we will get started. Let's pray. Oh God, Skycrest is and has been such a blessing to so many people. In preparing for this church conference, I was privileged to be able to look over membership rolls of folks who have joined years and years ago, some of whom maybe even are no longer with us, and yet we remember the impact they've had. And so many of us here are here because we've been shaped by those who've come before us. So we do so now again at an important time in the life of the church, first and foremost grateful that God has called us to Skycrest, and even more grateful and humbled to be able to participate in God's mission to the world through Skycrest. God, as we talk about and do the important business of the church, as we make important decisions, may we do so not as people without hope, but rather as folks who know that the Lord walks with us each step of the way. Open our hearts and our ears and our minds to hear one another, and may this be a time where we honor you and one another in our business today. For it's in the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. Well, you all should have gotten my email with kind of a summary of some things here. If not, we can have some extras I can get to you after the meeting just so you have for your reference. But I just thought it would be helpful to go over a brief history of where we've been when it comes to capital improvements. And I know if you were thinking deja vu, we just talked about capital improvements last year, you're not alone and you're not mistaken. Last year, actually October I think it was, you all had a capital improvements telethon. If we want to see from the next slide, I believe you all Skycrest raised $43,000 towards capital improvements last year. And there were three particular projects that you focused on. There was replacing the Child Development Center roof, replacing the parsonage tile roof, and then replacing the boiler. And you all were incredibly faithful with that. And might I add, you did it with one event. That wasn't even for a long-term, that came out in a one event, which is so incredible. And it shows, I think, the faithfulness of the church. So you'll see from the next slide, the total completed repairs ended up being $130,000, close to $131,000. So close to $88,000 of that were taken from reserves that were used to complete projects. We were in a position last year where the decision was made to not take on any debt. And so I think we need to celebrate that. And if you have questions, and I'm happy to field them about why are we talking about capital improvements when we did them last year, this does not at all negate what you all did last year. We have two buildings that were built, this one in the mid-50s, the sanctuary in the mid-60s. We have gotten a lot of use and a lot of mileage out of them, and it just so happens that a lot of things are needing care at the same time. And with that, I don't think I named this before, but I want to say a special thank you to Denise Mullis for all of your work. Let's give it up for Denise, because I don't know that you knew fully what was going to be into this, but I am so grateful that you were up for the challenge. Well, and even before I got here, I got a sense that, okay, she knows what she's doing and I need to follow her. So I'm so grateful for all that you've done, Denise. Because with all of these things that came up, and you saw last year, Denise was making phone calls, getting quotes, lining stuff up so that everybody has the information. So that is kind of where we are so far in terms of where we've been. If you want to go to the next slide, it's just kind of I said thank you on that. So, and I don't know if it's helpful to kind of ask questions in each section or just kind of move along. If you have a question, raise your hand. Okay, we'll just keep going along. So then the next section is how we got here to this meeting today. So you see from the next slide, I knew, and Emily had shared with me, Pastor Emily, who's here. I don't know if y'all saw her. She's going to be leading the meeting with us. She had shared with me the work that y'all were doing for the capital projects last year, and she had said there are some things coming down the pike. We don't yet know when they will be. In particular, we knew that the fellowship hall roof, I believe, Denise, they told us by the end of this year, was going to need to be replaced. So we knew that was coming. But really, I think what started this process was a combination of things. Number one, we had this, the room you're in right now in person. It's a... Denise, I'm going to get the language wrong, but it's a very large unit that broke down. And so all of a sudden we noticed one Sunday morning it was pretty warm. So the other unit luckily was able to help compensate a little bit, but we knew that was a problem in the middle of the summer. And then we had the upstairs Child Development Center AC, which the SCDC has been growing, and they were actually moving a class upstairs to be able to expand. And so, obviously, for safety concerns, the kids were not up there while it was not functioning. But because of that, those two units in particular were around $65,000. And then we knew with the roof, which last year was, and you'll see the list of quotes in a couple slides, but yeah, there we go. So the Fellowship Hall roof last year was quoted upwards of $59,000, and with inflation, Denise and I and the board were guesstimating that it would be probably close to $65,000. So with those two numbers right there, we were starting to add up the prices pretty quickly. It was about $130,000 with those three projects: this AC unit, that AC unit, and then the Fellowship Hall. So all that to say, really, when these two units broke, being in Florida in the middle of the summer, ACs and roofs, and luckily, well, I don't even want to speak it into existence. The roof is okay for now, but we knew that those need to be replaced, especially if we're going to have worship in here. If we're going to have the kids upstairs, we need to have those replaced. So the board had made the decision that given where we are with our reserves, and I believe you'll see that in one of the slides later on, that we were comfortable moving forward with these two units, assuming that we come up with a plan for replenishing reserves. And so that's how we got to where we were. So Denise and I met with Andy Kraske, who is a representative from our United Methodist Credit Union, or United Methodist Foundation in Florida. And if you haven't checked out the foundation stuff, I really encourage you to do so. Not only do they do loans, they also have a development fund, which we are also considering for our reserves. There we go. Sorry, I'm blanking on the words. Their rates are good. Their rates for the development fund are 1.75, and you'll see later the rates for the loans are 3.75. So in terms of shopping around, it's competitive, and actually I think probably one of the best deals we're going to get. So we met with Andy Kraske just to talk with him about what that process looked like. Emily and I had met as well, and she had shared with me, would you be comfortable, if it comes up later, to share a little bit more about those in the district who have done loans as well. She let me know there are lots that have taken out loans from the foundation. So we met with Andy to talk about what that process might look like. And he had shared with us, if you're going to do a loan, given the fees that it takes to do a loan, what you don't want to do is get exactly what you need for this year, and then if you know you've got another project in 2 years, have to take that out again and then have more funds for it. So he said, if there are things you know are imminent and are practical, but they're imminent, consider putting some of those together and voting on what that might look like. So we went together, and Denise and I went through, and again, I mentioned to you, she's been doing a lot of work figuring out how we can maintain our buildings and be good stewards of them. There are a lot of things that we have coming down the pike, and so she and I went down the list to say, what are things, we called them A-list projects, so things that are imminent and urgent. So again, ACs, which already have been replaced, the roof, which we know is within the year, and you'll see the list of some other things as well. So these are not, there's no B-level things on here. So just so you know, I've had people ask, hey, what about this project? If it didn't make the list, it's not because it's not important. It was just not, based on what we talked about, imminent, urgent right now. Because ideally, if we're going to do a capital project, we can forecast that out and we can do a lot of pre-work ahead of time. It's not a preferred situation to have to respond, but again, I think we're making the most faithful decision with the hand we've been dealt, given that we had two pretty expensive AC units go out on us at the same time. So that is how we got here so far. And again, I mentioned last year the decision was made to not take on debt because of where we were with our reserves. We are not in that place this year. So I think last year, I want to say I had written it down somewhere. Well, anyways, I clearly missed that part. But we are not in that spot this year to be able to do that. So that is how we got to where we are today. So if we want to go to the, we'll stay on that slide actually. So what we did is we listed out these projects for your consideration. These are the ones we had considered A-list level to be considering today. Just because it's on this list does not mean we have to vote, like we have to approve that. So if you go through the list and we have the conversation time and you say, hey, why are we doing this now? Can we reconsider this? Pastor Emily's going to have us take a vote on the motion that the board had approved with the number that they had given toward the loan. If you decide I'd like to amend that number based on these projects, we can do that. So this really is the work of the church. But what we did here, the fellowship hall and child development AC units, there's a star there because that's already been done. The internet and phone system upgrade, that is done because Connie in the Child Development Center needs internet upgraded in order to be able to do the things she's doing for school with VPK. So that was sort of a non-negotiable and needed to be done. It will end up saving us some money too operationally for the phone system as well. So those are two that have already begun. There's sanctuary AC repair. That's not a replace thing. That's just, we had about $800, $850 worth of work that was done earlier in the year. And they had told us, we may find a little more that needs to be done based on this work. And so what ended up happening was there were some compressors and fan motors that needed to be replaced because of that. And so that's the sanctuary AC repair. In our conversations, we feel like we want to get as much out of those sanctuary AC units as we can and treat them as carefully and gingerly as we can. And so that's why that made it on the list. The fellowship hall roof is one of those. Last year we replaced we've got 3 roofs here in this whole kind of triplex area. We've got the fellowship hall roof, we've got the roof right above the office, and then we've got the Child Development Center roof over there. You all replaced that roof, the Child Development Center, last year. So this one is what we're guesstimating is about $65,000, and we were quoted that would be by the end of the year. So we had a ticking clock on that one. The sanctuary exterior doors, for those especially who are a part of the traditional service, you will know there's one set of doors near the soundboard. I'll put this nicely, it is difficult to secure all the time or to close it very well. And then there's one by the organ that is difficult to open without an extremely high level of force. And so we were starting to look at what that looked like, and given that they were steel doors and had lots of reinforceable things above, the quote we were given was between $31,000 and $33,000, which included install. I believe it was $31,000 with $2,000 install is what that was. Now, I feel a little behind the 8 ball on this, and I apologize, but in full disclosure, over the past week, Pat had met with somebody who was looking at the doors. Phil Jester, yes. So I don't know, and especially for those on the Zoom, one of the things that came up, just to share what Denise said, that first set of doors is really one of those, it's not the most secure there, and especially making sure that, that we keep everything secure and safe in the sanctuary. That was something that was on our radar. And so it came up that there may be an option to still secure it for the time being at a much lower cost, and then maybe later down the line look at either refurbishing or fully replacing. We don't have a figure, but I think the ballpark we had was around 5,000 or 6,000. So if that were the case, that if the church decided to lower that, that 33,000 number would go down from that. Yes, Jen?
Is that a fire door, though? Does that door necessarily have to be there if we just, like, take it down and then, like, wall it up? Then you won't have to, you pay that now, and then you won't have to worry about replacing that door, like, when you replace the other doors.
You mean in order to just not have it function as a door at all?
Right. If it's not a fire door, and then, because no one goes in and out of that door, really, in the morning, in the afternoon, except for you.
Well, I thought of Sam.
Mm-hmm. Out that door, one less like traffic in and out. Just eliminate that door because on the other side, like looking at Cemetery, there's not another door on the other side that kind of like matches that side.
Toward the street, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
There is.
Oh, there is?
So I mean, unless they're fire doors, I can see like getting rid of them.
Okay.
Main door to go in and out.
Okay.
So it's just a thought.
Sure?
Just to save money.
Yeah. But there would be a cost in walling it in then?
Right, just walling it in.
Okay.
It's a one-time cost, and you never have to worry about breakage or anything else.
Sure. Okay. And I do know, oh, go ahead.
Those doors are used, though.
Yeah.
That 158.
The one by the soundboard? Okay. Well, and I do know one of the things we ran into in talking about the sanctuary doors was the importance of the aesthetic, maintaining the look. I know those have been wooden doors. Wooden doors bring their own level of challenge with moisture and all that stuff, but there's a certain feel to it and an aesthetic to it, especially keeping with the consistency of the sanctuary. And I think right now the doors we were looking at were steel, so not the prettiest, but there are paint jobs we could do. So those are some of the things we've been looking at with the doors. Denise, was there anything else you wanted to say about the doors?
No, the only thing, as far as walling it in, I know Pat discussed with the fire marshal about getting okay for blocking that one. I don't know if we ever had the numbers back to what that church would hold, if it would be okay to wall that in. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So that's that project. Then as we were coming up with these things, there seemed to be more projects that were A-level in terms of, we had the kitchen refrigerator in here that has been, if you've used that refrigerator on a regular basis, it freezes quite a bit. That refrigerator is 21 years old. So we've gotten a lot of use out of it. But not only does the church use it, the school uses it as well. We also want to make sure that we are caring for the school, giving them the things they need to succeed. They've been growing and doing well. So that is something that is up for consideration as well. And I believe the cost for repairing would be more than the cost for replacing.
Not more, but they wouldn't guarantee anything as far as the thermostat.
Oh, I see. Okay. So really the only way to guarantee that the thermostat is accurate and is going to do what it needs to do on a consistent basis is replacing. So that number is over $8,300 for the kitchen refrigerator. And then finally, as this was happening, it's called a mini split, but essentially that's that little AC unit in the kitchen that went out on us probably a month ago. And so the amount of folks that are using that room, because my understanding is the central unit does not touch in there. So it's the mini split that is touching that. So those are the projects that we've listed. You'll see on the next screen, if the church decided to move on all of them, the amount of those projects were over $183,000. So with that, it would probably be good for us to stop if y'all have any questions, because I know these are a lot of numbers, and this is a lot of information, so we want to make sure folks have the information they need. And if there's anybody on Zoom that has a question, if you want to type it in, we can ask that and get those answered as well. Any questions? Let me get my steps in. I'll walk this around. Anybody? Sally?
About the doors.
Uh-huh.
The door estimate does not include, correct, the doors going from where the choir loft is on either side? Do you know what I'm saying?
The internal doors or the external doors?
External.
External, the four.
There's one on either side of the choir loft. You know what I'm saying?
The one by Ginger's organ?
Yeah. up the steps. And in the room, there's a restroom on the right side, and the robing room is on the left side. Those doors.
It's 4 sets of double doors.
No, these aren't double doors.
Okay, it's only the double doors.
Because those doors aren't good either.
Those single ones are
really-
not good as well.
Really, the floor is rotting.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that, and that's been a couple of years, so I just wanted to know if that was included.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Jay.
Does that have the doors to the boiler room been replaced or fixed? Or is, they've been secured?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah, the boiler room doors have been secured, not replaced.
okay.
Yeah, I was just there this morning. So the asterisk, Jake, can you go back to the list of, those are for the first 2 projects that have already either been purchased or in process. And so
Have they been expended?
so right now, they were expended from the reserves. So, yeah, so they were, in order to, I don't think we had enough cash on hand because this unit here was $45,000.
So the amount yet to be expended is $70,000 less than.
So I will do my fast math. Well, okay, so, yeah, so it would be the amount, it would be 183,000 less the, can you go back one more, Jake? Less the, 70,000 essentially. But remember, the plan was part of what the board talked about was what level of reserves were we comfortable with? Because the amount in the reserves were before the ACs went out and anything was approved. The funds were just under 170,000, which Emily, I believe we said that was about 3 to 4 months worth of expenses, about 3 months worth of expenses in reserves. And so in talking about moving forward on these time-sensitive wise, the understanding was the board would approve it with the condition that we would then consider a loan in order to replenish, to pay for the project and then replenish to a comfortable, whatever the church decides, a comfortable level for the reserves. Because the reserves help us, if there's ever, there are multiple things that the reserves have been used for. Oh, sure. Okay. Did that answer your question? Okay. Sue?
I'm just curious, we are under, we're not meeting our budget now. How do we pay for an $895 debt, monthly debt?
Yeah. Yeah? No, well, that's, yeah. So the question was, and that is something, frankly, and Emily can attest, I was not comfortable with talking about the loan just because I know we hadn't taken out a loan since the buildings were paid off. But there are some options for us, including, we saw the success of a one-time event like the telethon that you did last year. There are capital campaigns, and I've already reached out to Pastor Emily about other folks that have modeled what those campaigns have looked like. And so that's something to where we have kind of that set in order to help us with that. We also have, and this is something we talked about in the board meeting, we have a ton of space here that on a weekly basis is really unused. And there are plenty of folks we know in the area that could benefit from a place to rent, especially if we look at where the economy is, that folks may not feel comfortable buying a brick and mortar place, would be more comfortable with rental. And so Pat has actually secured, I know we've rented in the past, we've had other churches there was a church before that had done a worship service here, and so we are working on getting a schedule of fees to make sure that we're aware of what that looks like to help with some of that income. But there's no way around the fact that it is a very intentional thing for us to make sure that we are meeting the budget and addressing this need. Additionally, and you'll see in, I believe it's in one of the slides that'll come up later, historically, a lot of the capital projects have been funded through bequests or from memorial gifts for funerals. And those are not happening on a regular schedule basis. And so some of those come to us at times that we don't expect that may help us a little bit. I will say, too, in terms of the budget, and I wanted to make sure that we were very clear on where we were financially, and I think Pastor Emily will speak a little bit more about that when before we vote. Anybody who's ever worked with budgets before knows that it's real easy to take a end-of-year budget, divide it by 12, and say that's how much we need for each month. And we know in the church, especially, it doesn't work that way. We have seasonal folks. We have folks that have different plans throughout the year. We know, budgets look different throughout the year. We know, for example, our biggest time of giving every year is always the end of the year. We also have folks that are seasonal that end up coming back to us. We don't want to bank on a certain amount, but we do know it ebbs and it flows. That gives a little bit of comfort, even though we don't have that specific amount. So those are some of the ways that we've been looking to offset that. And then meeting with some folks individually who have helped in the past and talking to folks about ways that they can continue supporting the church through this as well. But I think that's a good question, and we need to be asking that. And that's one of the things we're excited about having this. It's important that we all know what we all know. We've been through so many transitions over the past few years with COVID, pastor transition, new pastor coming in. We've had a lot of staff in and out. So it's important that everyone's on the same page, and that's why you're voting so that you decide this is where we want to be and this is what we want to do. Doris?
Have you ever considered having pledges? Have you considered having pledges?
For this project or just giving in general?
Well, either way, but mostly for this project.
So full disclosure, I have never led a capital campaign before. So Pastor Emily, I don't know if you can speak to the fact our pledge is normally a part of a capital campaign. Yeah, so that is something we can incorporate in a campaign, in addition to the pledging to the church, because I know we do a pledge drive every year, November. Right. And it would be something that we roll out for a number of years or a certain amount of time frame that we would do for folks to be able to do that. And I think the pledging is what helps us that's what we plan our budget around, and I think that's, in terms of being good stewards of this, allow us to plan for that as well. Jen?
So you were talking about, like, the estates mostly go to the, like, CI fund. Are there any, like, assets to liquidate, like any stocks or bonds that are, that could be liquidated to go into a more of a fluid status to be able to pay for these kinds of things, or no?
So I believe, and Jim, I'll look at you from the finance perspective. Did you hear her question?
Yeah, the amount in the Merrill Lynch fund includes stocks as well as the high money or high return safety factor that we keep most of our money in. And there is also a portion that is set aside as a offset as a reserve right now that can be attached to with a proper vote from the church to change the structure. And the thing that specifically shows in there is a scholarship fund, and that can be modified with church approval.
So essentially, I know historically, and y'all can fill me in a little bit, I'm still learning, part of that Merrill Lynch fund does have stocks included with it. The board has decided I think there was a cap that was put on how much was in stocks for the security purpose of making sure that, too much is not put in the kind of the risky business of stocks. So anytime we take from that fund, the percentage of stocks that we own goes up. So that's where we were just talking about last week in the board meeting. So what Jim had said is that I think it's on the table to be able to sell those stocks if we need to, but it's a part of the Merrill Lynch fund.
Have we talked to Merrill Lynch about some kind of, like, CI, fund, and then have, like, a higher yield on how much return? I know that we're in a recession right now, but we're not always going to be in one.
Right.
If we have, this is not like a retirement plan. If we have, like, a separate part with them to have a higher interest of return. That way it will grow some money faster over time versus that way we're not like in a safety net all the time.
Sure.
Because it's not going to grow.
Right.
I mean, it's just a thought in the future.
Yeah.
The purpose of reserves is to be in safe money. So I understand the need to maximize yield, but the purpose is safety, not growth. So, like we're at 15% stock right now. That's high for where we want to be. I mean, we can look at this, but it's kind of missing the forest for the trees, in my opinion.
But I think your question was, would it be an option? And I understand it could be on the table if that's something we decided to do. Yeah, Mike.
I guess I'll look at it a little differently. We've been going all these years, and we don't need to borrow money, which says we're not making enough money to support our lifestyle, that we have to borrow money. I guess I would be looking at changing our lifestyle before I would look at borrowing money to maintain a losing lifestyle. And I know people won't want that, but we obviously don't need the sanctuary. We could do it here. I mean, it seems like a lot of ways to live within our budget than for all these years we've been debt-free to now borrow money rather than look at how do we live within what we have. Because I don't see it getting better.
See what, in terms of our financial situation?
Yeah. I mean, we've looked at the past and we've obviously been losing money, or else we wouldn't be in this position where we have to borrow money. Now, I don't look at trends for the years and all that, but that's what it looks like to me, is that if we continue doing what we're doing now, we're just going to lose more money. We're not going to make more money to pay off the loan. We're just going to lose more money and borrow again. It seems we're attacking the wrong part of the problem. We got to reduce our costs, not borrow more money to do it. Now, there may be some short-term things you do have to do, but you have to eventually bite the bullet and says we cannot continue operating two separate entities or whatever because we're losing money. We have been doing that. So that's the part you have to really look at, not because I don't see a big influx of money coming to pay the loan back unless somebody has some knowledge that I don't have. But it just seems to me that we should not be borrowing money to maintain a lifestyle we can't afford. Yes. Sorry about that.
No, it's, yeah. And I know, well, yeah.
So, going on to your point, and I do agree about it some, then why don't we look at things that we're paying for that also take in money, like the school? I know that we pay a lot of money for the school. Maybe having them move more toward a separate, more like entity, since their school is growing, and that's great. I know that at one point we were like one of the lowest as for rate of like how much the parents have to pay to go to school. Look at maybe moving towards a more appropriate, like independent thing, and then they start having like an escrow account and things like that to be able to pay for the needs that they have when things come up versus the church paying for it all the time. Just thought.
Sure. Yeah, well, I do know, and there have been seasons that the school, and I wasn't here for this, the school has kind of ebbed and flowed in terms of the amount that it's brought in. I know currently, and I've been in touch with Paula, I don't know if y'all have had a chance to meet Paula, our new bookkeeper. She's been wonderful. And she's had many conversations with Connie. The school is doing well in terms of, and Emily was helpful in filling me in about the importance of ratios, making sure Connie's aware of ratios. When you run a school like that, it's all about making sure the amount of children in each class is supporting the teachers in the class, and we're not bleeding money out of those classes. And so it has been doing well, and actually I think that has been, we're in the same account, we share the same account even though we have two different budgets. So I think currently the school is in a good spot. But, I mean, I think, yeah, I don't know if anyone wanted to speak to that, but.
I happened to be the chairman of the board for the school when it started. And we were at that time contributing quite a bit of money to the church. It was a profit-making deal for us back then.
Yeah.
And I would suspect it should be if private individuals can go out and buy a building and pay all that expense and make a living.
Yeah.
We have a school here that has a facility that's shared. We should be able to make a profit with it,
Yeah.
because we were making a real nice profit in the beginning.
Yeah.
Brian, they might not know what amount the school pays right now to the church.
Oh, yes.
Flat fee.
Yeah, so the school currently, and this is something we're looking at condensing into documentation, but each month the school pays $1,000 for essentially rent. I don't know if we call it rent because they're a ministry of the church, but $1,000 for that and then $1,000 for utilities. So it's $2,000 a month they're paying here. There have been, and I've looked at other schools connected with churches where there have been agreements made for, they, obviously whatever they need for their budget, the school gets, and then anything above that would be split a certain percentage between the church and the school. I think you had said in the past there was an agreement that everything up to a certain amount or past a certain amount would go to the church. So I think part of what we're looking at, in addition, I mentioned Pat is looking at a facilities use agreement and then coming up with a fee schedule. Part of it will also be kind of officially creating that documentation relationship between the school and the church. So these are good questions, and that's really important stuff. And I will say, you had mentioned about the sanctuary. I do know that there are a lot of other things that go along. If we, I don't know if you were talking about this and potentially selling a building or something like that. When you start to do that, there are other unexpected things that come with that. For example, most of our parking is over there, and we also have no control over, once something is sold, what goes next to it. What'd you say?
They'll put a gas station there. They do it to every church that sells property.
They'll put a gas station, right. So it's not to say other churches haven't done it and it's not doable, but I think that's a very serious, that would require a lot of serious conversation. It would also, I think there's a district or conference committee on those properties that...
They'll tell you not to sell it.
Okay, she's...
They'll tell you
Yeah.
not to sell it. We can,
Well, that's what came into my mind when he said that, was like, I've heard that they frown on selling buildings, unless absolutely, necessary. So...
Should save a lot of money by just not using it. That was
Sure.
the worst case.
Well, I do think part of it, too, is looking at how we are the best stewards of what we have, even if we're not talking about ridding ourselves of buildings. How are we being good stewards when it comes to use of the facilities, cutting costs in areas that we need to? So far, I've been talking to the staff about anything that's not currently in the budget and is not absolutely necessary. We're holding off on that. And so I think being a good steward of that, of those resources, is very important. So when we need to be asking these important questions, it means we're taking it seriously.
They're going to be tough questions if you're going to get down to where they can afford it.
Right,
It's going to be a real tough question.
right?
Very sensitive people.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of this, just so you know, and I appreciate y'all's patience with this, as you know, the best way to encourage buy-in to something and honest conversation is transparency. The easiest way to shut down a conversation and to lose people is for people to feel like you're hiding something. Hopefully that's come across in our 7 months together. I'm an open book, sometimes to my detriment, but I think with stuff like this, you deserve to know exactly where we are, exactly what we're considering, and let's be honest, you have a whole lot more wisdom in this than I do, and a whole lot more years in history here, and so I think it's important. Again, I don't have a vote in this, so this is the church conversation. We're facilitating this, but so these are good and important questions. Judy.
Well, it just seems to me that if we don't take care of what we have, we're not going to grow. And people are not going to be happy. And I think we have to do whatever we can do to keep things running and upgraded.
Jim?
I understand where Mike's coming from, and I agree that something has to change. What I'm kind of relating this whole procedure we're doing here now comparable to a Chapter 11 filing for bankruptcy, which many, many big corporations do. And that filing for bankruptcy is a protection temporarily while they restructure and change things around and come back on, and most of those do come back as a viable thing. So I consider this, in my mind at least, as a Chapter 11 with a temporary solution with borrowing more money, but between now and then 2 to, say, 4 years, something has to change. So I think we're kind of on both ways there.
Yeah. Thank you. So just to be clear, you weren't advocating for Chapter 11, you're likening this to Chapter 11. Okay. That's why that look on my face, I was like, that's one of the words I did not expect to come up in the conversation today. Okay. Again, open book. Okay. Any of our Zoom folks have any questions? Well, while they're putting it, anybody else have questions? Yeah.
So like going on like the budget, have we had like someone come in and like look at our budget, go line by line and say, okay, you're paying too much for this, you don't really need this, okay, this can stay, just like someone who has like a great, that's not us, but can like look at it globally to say, okay, this is where you're spending too much on paper, why don't you go paperless,
Right.
or things like that, to also, why we're doing this, to kind of get a hold of the budget, that way, we're not selling things, but we're trying to like clean house at the same time.
Right. Yeah, so I think that goes to, again, good financial practices and budgeting practices. Paula had put together a list just for our references of monthly costs that does not include salary. So lawn maintenance, utilities, all that stuff. And I believe it's over $11,000 a month in terms of all of our expenditures for those. And that's just operating. That's not salary. That's not the other stuff as well. So we've been looking at, and some of the things we can't get around. There are others we're talking about a potential, like a contract if we can get it lowered, given that we don't need what it's for at that level. Yeah, that is something. So I know in terms of having somebody external come look at it, Jim, I don't know if you can speak to that. I know we've had audits every year.
But that's not really for that.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the auditor wouldn't do that. It would be somebody else, but it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Another type of account that's not, that doesn't have like, a stake in that say that's passionate about something. Like office managers are passionate about having certain things in their office.
Yeah.
But you look at it from something outside thing, like that can really go, you're spending way too much
Right.
money on that.
Just from a good financial practices to say, okay, why are you spending this much on the, okay, I see what you're saying. I think that's a great option. And also something that came up as well in terms of helping us to better spend what we have. Many of y'all were here before when Pastor Emily and Matt had led the Financial Peace course. So I think offering that course as well as a way for us to relook at how we are individually managing our finances, and then as a church as well, looking at how we're doing that. That's another thing to add to that process. Okay. Now with that, let's go ahead and move forward. If y'all have any other questions as they come up, feel free to ask. A little bit of details about the loan. I mentioned the, had we already passed the loan? Oh, there we go. From the conference perspective, they are, their loan is, it's a adjustable loan. It is a 3.75, but once the loan is closed, the monthly payments stay the same. So even if the term of it goes longer, you never end up paying more per month than what you agree on. And they can loan for up to 20-year terms. And I will say the quotes that we got were for the 20 years. I know they said on average, the churches that take loans from them, did he say 20-year loans? The average of churches that took out loans from them paid them off in 7 to 8 years. So that was encouraging. And we looked at the amount of folks, the amount of loans that folks are getting, different churches. There are a lot of Methodist churches, especially that are using them and have done really well with them. So, and I sent some information about the foundation. I hope you all got a chance to look, and if you didn't, please go look at them. They're good folks, and they know churches. Anybody can have an account with them for the development fund as well as loans, but they really are passionate about helping local churches, particularly Methodist churches. So they're good folks. They share space in the annual conference, but they are separate from the conference. So a little bit of background to who they are. And then, got my sheets all messed up. So if we want to go to the next one, Jake. Oh, there we go. So when the board was looking at the amount of considering to borrow, again, it was if folks went with the entirety of that slate of projects, which is the 183 plus $1,000, we were looking at how much we felt comfortable with keeping the reserves at, also knowing that at some point we know there will be other projects that come up, but again, if we're planning ahead, we're not borrowing for that, we're raising it ahead of time. Or at least systematically working towards it rather than responding to an emergency like we are here. So for a 20-year loan that's $150,000, it would be close to $900 monthly payment. 175 moves just a little over $1,000, and then 200,000 is close to $1,200 a month. And it's not, and again, I think, Mike, you had a good point, that these are to be taken seriously because it adds up.
I guess I need to say one more thing.
Sure.
I guess I never heard of a loan like that. So they could stretch that loan out for another 10 years, and you have to pay that much more for another 10 years or another 20 years because they've upped the rate so that it would take that long to pay it off.
You mean if it's adjusted?
Yeah, if they say you're keeping the same payments, but that means you could be paying that payment for another 10 years.
Right. Well, and so
I've
he
never-
sent me.
Never heard of that, but that's,
Well, and
I just never heard of a loan like that.
yeah, I think.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
but that just seems like it could go on forever.
If they decided to up the rates. Well, I know that they meet quarterly. Their board meets, Denise, was it quarterly to vote on the current rates? Looking at the past years, they had, there were a couple years where it was 7%. There were a couple years it was under the 3.75. But it was, yeah, and I can send that information out if you'd like. He had sent that to me. I didn't print it out, but I can send it out to folks.
Are there any options, like with the 3.75 APR is there a point, like if interest rates were to drop, especially for loans like this, to refinance it and get a lower interest rate in the future?
Based on what they vote? Yeah, because the number he gave us was that, he said it was a 3.75, it is adjustable, but he said, yeah, every quarter they meet to do that. So I don't, do you know about the refinancing options that they have?
People refinance, but if they adjust it down, I don't know that you would have to. I think it would just go down.
Okay.
The other thing the foundation will do is interest only for churches that are having a hard time. So that's another, I guess, advantage. If you were having a hard few months, they'll let you pay just interest only.
So I don't know if you heard Pastor Emily said another thing they do for the churches is if you're having a hard time, a hard couple months paying a certain amount back, they will, for churches, allow just interest-only payments. It's not preferred, but it's certainly an option to know that grace is there.
I'm a little confused. The 3.75, that's a fixed rate loan?
It's an adjustable rate loan.
It's just,
It's an adjustable rate, but the monthly payments are fixed. So basically, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say fixed. The monthly payments are locked in once you close on the loan. So even if the rate changes quarterly, it's not a fixed rate. No. Paul?
We have a question from online about whether a fixed rate loan is available at all.
Not from the foundation. Yeah, the foundation does not do fixed rates unless you know something different. No, they said, and did y'all get my info? I'll resend the information from the foundation just so you have it in front of you, but it shares their information about that. Yeah, the only numbers they gave us were 1.75 for the development fund, what it pays out, and then 3.75 for any loans they make. So, did I see another hand?
Just at the fire the lawn service, he'll do it $60 a week.
Say that one more time.
Just at the fire the lawn service, he'll do it for $60 a week.
Okay.
He's serious. He's about to start his lawn business.
Oh, okay. So we may have a lead on a lawn service then. All right. And I think part of that is looking at, what we are spending. Some things we can't get around, but other things we can. So that's good. And then, so that was the loan conversation. I will say, too, on the next slide, so this was just to list kind of where we are financially. And I apologize, I put red thinking it would make an impact, but it's just hard to read. So The budgeted income we had for this year was over 250,000, 252,000 plus. The actual income so far is 230,221. Now, I'm still learning what the rhythm of the church year looks like in terms of our seasonal folks and the giving, and I'm still kind of living into that. So that puts us at close to $22,000 under the budgeted income that we expected. In terms of expenses, the budgeted expenses were $252,500, and the actual expenses were about $25,000 plus more than that budgeted amount. So in total, less income than we expected, more expenses than we expected. So far, we are $47,000 over budget. I'm not excited about that number. I will say writing it down didn't make me happy, but again, I think we need to be transparent in where we are. Part of it, and I'm happy if y'all have questions to speak to kind of where we are. One of those, the big item from the 25,000 of that is the down payment on the AC unit. So 25,000 of that 47,000 is from the down payment of the AC unit. Yeah, and then we'll have another 42 for the completion of the project that will also come from, that will show in the over budget number. We also had a pastor move, so that was an expense that won't be a yearly thing. I'm hoping not, unless y'all know something I don't want to move anytime soon. So, I'm happy to speak to more if y'all have other questions about that. But so that's kind of where we are financially right now.
Do you have like the past 10 years, profit and loss for each year? Just the one number.
Do we have it?
We made it or we went under it for the last 10 years?
In terms of, I know last year we didn't make budget.
I'm not talking about budget, I'm on actual money, income versus expense. And did we spend more?
Oh, well, that's, okay.
For the last 5 years or 10 years, do we have a trend?
I don't have that offhand. Jim, do you have a trend in terms of, I tell you what, I will find that information and get that to you. It'd be in the record with Paula? Mm-hmm.
That would tell you whether you're going to be making enough money to repay this loan, or if you're going the other direction.
Okay. All right. And then going to the next slide, the Merrill Lynch funds, just to give a little bit of context, they were just under 170,000 before the 2 AC replacements. Currently, the Merrill Lynch reserve funds are 143. Jim had mentioned before about 30,000, well, close to 39,000 of that was designated for scholarships. So just a little bit of context. So I think last year it was, Denise, before the capital projects, it was at 200 and, I don't mean to put you on the spot. 260-something thousand? Okay. So that's where we are with the annual budget and the Merrill Lynch account. And I just mentioned on the next slide just about the major capital improvements typically coming from estate gifts. So just a little bit of background. So that's kind of my presentation piece of that. Are there any more questions you all have, Kevin?
Estate gifts, it seems like it's an important part of the budget. If someone who has some background and familiarity could comment on how that's worked over time.
How that's worked, meaning the amount, or just more so how people make estate gifts to the church?
On average every year, or on average every how many, 2 years, 3 years?
Can you speak to that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that one's fine.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I can say a word about that, Kevin. Good to see you guys also. For those of you I didn't get to say hello to individually on the way in, I hope you'll say hi before leaving. A word about estate gifts. There has not been one regular budgeted amount. Some years, so I was here for the past 9 years, some years we would go with really no deaths or no major estate gifts. And then some years, I remember one year we had one that was $250,000. And so
They come and they go. Our practice has been here at this church that anything over $10,000 would go directly to capital improvements. Things that are smaller amounts, like, you know, if you go to a funeral and put a little something in the envelope at the funeral, sometimes that would get appropriated in different ways. The smaller money could go right into the budget. Bigger gifts over $10,000 would go directly to capital improvements. Some years it was none. Some years it was 10, 20, 30,000. And then one year, I remember about 7 or 8 years ago, it was very, very large. I hope does that help?
Yeah, it does. Just a suggestion. I know that you had a program for individuals and their budgets and so forth. I'm wondering if people would be interested in estate planning, a program for estate planning that highlights including estate gifts to the church.
Mm-hmm. And the foundation offers that, so maybe when you follow up with Andy and Ed and those guys. Are there more questions, or are we ready to move towards the voting?
I
What do you
don't,
think?
and unless anybody has questions, that was all I had.
Okay. Well, it looks like we are ready to get towards voting here. I will just say a couple things. First, that there are about 15 churches in our district out of 80 who have loans with the foundation. I get reports on these every month. I have to sign off on every church that has a loan, and so I monitor their progress in repaying. And so that was some good research in working with Pastor Ryan and the group to figure out if this would be a good fit for you all. So I've got in our district about 15 churches with loans. I noticed that most of those were churches with positive cash flow that were using debt responsibly to upkeep their buildings. Kind of like, maybe like we don't love debt in our family, we don't just use debt on the regular, but if we had to fix our roof, we might take out money to fix our roof. So I've seen, of my 80 churches, I've seen 15 in our district using debt responsibly to upgrade their facilities, to keep them nice, so that when guests come onto their property, it looks like a place that they want to be. They're using their debt to maintain their buildings and make their properties inviting. On the other hand, there are some churches that I oversee who are selling off property or just not maintaining it, and it's just starting to look, when I visit some of these churches, they don't look like somewhere you'd want to go back to. They don't look like somewhere that's being taken care of. So I think that if you all choose to do this, it could be a positive step in the upkeep and making this place as welcoming as possible. I also agree with those who are kind of showing some concern that it's really important that we recognize where we're at financially, and if we do this, to really, really commit to good financial practices as a church. I love all the ideas that were thrown out, and this is the key. If you all could reach maybe 10 more families, get them involved, get them joining, get them giving and participating, I think that's an easy number to think about. If you could reach 10 more families and get them really connected, that would swing it back to where this debt payments would really be affordable. And I think that's something that between now and Christmas, I think that's a goal that you all could achieve. This is an awesome church. You have a great pastor. You have wonderful leaders. And I think there's 10 more families in this vicinity who would really like to come here. So I fully believe that you can do that part of it, no matter what you decide on this loan. So I'm here now because a church conference approves things that are not just the pastor's decision. And Ryan really wanted to put this to you all for a vote of the church so that you all have ownership over this. So this is all of your decision here. The motion is already before us. This is the motion from your leadership board to take out the loan, the 3.75, the 20-year term, and what the board has approved or proposed to you all is the $200,000 amount. So that was the biggest amount, the one with the $1,195 monthly payment. So that is the motion in the second because it's coming to you from a committee of the church. So that's our proposal, 20-year loan, $1,195 monthly payments, the $200,000 loan. Someone, if they want to go with a lower amount, can propose an amendment, and then we can go from there. But I'll just start it off with that being the motion. You can amend it. You can say something for or against it if you want to, although I feel like we've heard from almost everybody, or we can go ahead and take a vote. Are we ready to vote? Okay. Paul, do you think we're ready online to vote as well? Okay. So we're just going to do this by a raise of hand. If it's really close and we need to get out slips of paper and make ballots, we will. But I'm just going to put the motion before you to take out a $200,000 loan with the $1,195 monthly payment. It's going to be a 20-year loan. That's the motion before you. Everyone in favor of that is going to raise your hands. Okay. Paul, you've got, are people voting online? You have a way of keeping track of that? All right, y'all can put your arms down before they get tired. Anyone who's opposed to that can raise your hands. Sure. Okay. I appreciate people feeling comfortable either way, speaking your minds. It looks like that was a clear majority, unless, Paul, you're seeing something else online. Okay. Then we are approved. I'll turn it back over to Ryan.
This mic. So thank you all for your faithfulness to this process, and I appreciate the questions that come, frankly, because this is a mode of accountability for us as a church. Mike, I think your point was right on, that if we keep doing things the way that have been done, we're going to keep getting the results we have been getting and lamenting why things continue to go down. And so I think part of this is looking at things differently. I think part of that is, and I know the board is committed to continuing to engage in that process. I've been sharing, I think this is a good reminder for folks, again, in terms of where we are. I've appreciated your faithfulness to the church, not only in the capital giving in the past, but you're continuing to give throughout the year. But this is something I think that we will continue to put things in place to make sure that we are faithful to this process, and not just paying off the things that we have, but continuing to look, visioning and in the future of where we are going as the church, because this is a generational decision of where we're going and things we're handing off to folks in the future, and the church that we want to have in the future. So, do you have a question, Doris?
No, I just want to say that we need, as individuals and families, to investigate, to really think about our gifts. I think of women's things, not the next nail polish, not the next whatever. You know, our priorities. We need to be working on our priorities of giving.
Thank you, Doris. Any other comments folks wanted to make? Yes, Linda. Oh, sure.
Going back to what Pastor Emily just said about getting families in the area and bringing them in, have we ever done anything, I know not since I've been here that I know of, to hit the community around here heavily, that we would tell them about our two services, about the one service in here for the younger families, the traditional service, the fact that our church is open to everyone that wants to come and is definitely welcome. But I think it goes back to advertising for anything that you want in today's world. You have to get the word out, and you have to follow it up. And even if we ended up going door to door, maybe we have some of the teenagers who are old enough that they could just go put a flyer in, leave it at houses. But word of mouth getting around is really a big plus. And this is a great church, and we have great leaders that I really think they would find a home.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah?
When Emily was our pastor, she was very good about outreach. We had flyers, we had things around Easter time. I mean, we even had a map at one time of the Skycrest neighborhood about if you could send this flyer or whatever to their house or things like that. And we did that for a little bit of while, but then, COVID hit and kind of like changed us. So yeah, if we could get back to that and maybe some more like advertising, especially since we live stream. I don't know what kind of like audience that we have on live stream and how many live streamers do we have compared to what we actually have in seats. So outreach that way maybe would, since we are like in a digital like world now because of COVID, but yeah, it was an idea.
I do think we have in general, and I appreciate y'all's feedback, leaning on both the traditional aspects that have made us what we are and leaning into the future. So doing the things we do well and not using those things to keep us from also expanding into other areas that maybe I know I may feel uncomfortable with my level of mastery with it, but other folks are in it and excited about it. And so I think learning to tap into the resources we have. Amy?
Doug and I did that years ago with a group of people. We walked to each house, lots of houses, and gave them flyers and asked them to come to church. We didn't get really many people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of these things are things that we, have researched and know that, hey, in the past this has worked and we keep doing it. Other things, we try it, and if it sticks, great, and if not, we try something else. One of the things I do want to share with you all, just so you know, in terms of celebrating the church and looking to the future of the church, because I think you all are here at Skycrest, and Kristen and I could tell it the moment we came here that December morning, on Sunday morning in December, and visited for the first time. There's just something different about Skycrest. But people are here because they believe in the church, not just what it was, but what it is and what it can become. So something came up a couple of board meetings ago. I've been meeting with various leaders in the church as well as staff and just asking as I'm getting to know them, what are some things that we're doing well? What are some potential challenges that that are coming our way? What would you do if you were me? One of the things that came up in the conversation, Priscilla and Michael and I were talking about, I don't mean to call you out, but about some things that are doing well, things that we can grow in. And one of the things came about how can we find ways to better bridge the two services? Because any church, and I think Pastor Emily can attest, anytime you have multiple services, it kind of functions as two different churches. The thing that's added on to ours is that we have two different services in two different spaces. So finding ways to bridge that and create that. And Priscilla, I don't know if y'all have had a chance to talk with Priscilla and Michael. You very much should if you haven't. They're wonderful people. But she is incredibly detail-oriented and thoughtful and ministry-motivated. So that was, I think, a couple weeks prior. And then all of a sudden she came to the board meeting with a focus group plan and ended up, she and I had some conversations. We met with a small group from the board. And so we're working on a visioning process for the church. We're not going to do it ourselves, but in terms of putting together infrastructure so that actually our next meeting is going to map out timeline. The board is aware of the progress. That has started from within the church. She came to me with that. And that's somebody, they joined back in October and have already bought into what the church is doing here. And so I'm really excited about that. And so the process will be a little forecasting, getting together a vision team of folks that are representative of all of the church, from different services to age level to marital status to kids, all that stuff. Make sure that everybody is as well represented as possible. And we will also use Sunday services in a sermon series and talk-back sessions to get church feedback. So this is something, I know y'all did a visioning process back in 2010. I think out of that process came the mission statement, which is still used and still beloved. So I bring that to you to say, I'm really excited about the future of the church, and that's something that really gets me excited to see. I don't know about you all, but I get a little overwhelmed when I think, okay, how are we going to get there? But things like visioning and strategic planning and looking at how are we going to put something in place, not only to vision cast, but then prep to make sure we are actually achieving the goals that we would like. So I forecast that to you to say that is coming. And a little preview as well, we will be doing while I have you all here, going to be offering a grief support group coming up. I'm going to be finishing the Inside Out series with sadness, and so not long after that, we'll be doing a grief support group. So there are some things coming down the pike that I'm really excited about in addition to all this. It can be real easy when we talk about figures and lots in the red. It gets overwhelming and daunting, but there's a lot of good things happening here, and I'm grateful for you all, for your leadership, for your patience with me, and for sharing with me your passion for the church and where you see God leading us in the future. So So with that, Pastor Emily, would you mind closing us, please? Thank you.
Sam, there I am. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming out, sharing your opinions, and participating in the process. I will close us in prayer. Let's pray. God, we're so grateful for this special church that has been home in different ways for a lot of us, for a lot of different seasons. God, we want this church to continue to grow and thrive and be here and be strong for the next generation and ones after that. God, we pray over the decisions that were made today that you would continue to guide this church financially in all of its practices so that this loan might be an investment in our properties and in the growth of the future. God, we pray for generosity. We pray for new faces to be brought here. And we pray that evangelism and growth would be the work not just of our pastor and leaders, but of each and every one of us. Bless us and bless everyone here in Jesus' name. Amen. Bye, guys.
Thank you.